So this is what I call sex on bones. When I was a kid, just a little human with nothing but flesh and bone, people would always ask me all kind of funny questions like, is it a girl or a boy? Now, of course, the people who had the nerve to say this to my face were usually kids, usually about the age of themselves, trying to figure out whether or not they were a girl or a boy. Well, because, adults were too couth to say it. Finally, what had happened was, by the time I reached the age where my body started to change, people would literally start to look at me like, is it a girl or a boy? What's wrong with you? And so I started to look back at them looking at me. I wonder if people ever noticed me looking at them, ask me, who are you? And then I noticed sometimes they would replace it with, what are you? And of course, these were all the questions that I would then ask back to them. Who are you and what are you? Because naturally, these questions would only be coming from people who were themselves, trying to answer those questions for themselves. And to see someone whose bones were layered with flesh, who did something different from what they expected or what they thought was right, they had to actually vocalize, as I call it, the man in the mirror or the woman in the mirror. So I started to notice all kinds of things about, for example, when my body started to change and I was becoming sex on bones, I started to see girls who were trying to figure out who they were, express themselves, like Salt-N-Pepa said, express yourself, let me be me. And as 50 Cent later went on to say, you do you, because can't nobody do me better than I can. So I would see boys, and I would ask people, especially boys, because they're the ones who even were more bossy towards me, to ask me, like, questions about who are you. For a cow, it's pretty simple. You can look at that beast, and matter of fact, you probably even know why that animal is there. Because it's a female, because it's a cow, in fact, and not a bull. And it's producing milk for communities around here. They pull them in a container. They pasteurize it here, I believe. And that's the function of that animal in its gender. So back to where I started. I would look at other boys asking me, who are you, what are you? And I would think to myself and observe them, who are you, what are you? What I noticed was, perhaps I was more perceptive of my own gender, or more critical, was that boys were acting like boys. I wasn't acting like anything but me, but boys were acting like what they thought boys should be. Now, I qualify this with the reality that I went to a so-called liberal school and went on to a liberal arts college and, put myself in circumstances where there were very liberal people. I credit myself with also having a religious community that was not based on a doctrine that tried to even answer the question, who are you and what are you, outside of the context of who are we. So who are we? Who are we when we look at each other like sex on bones? Like, what's your function? What you supposed to do? And we forget while we're looking in that mirror to ask, who are we? So this is what I learned about people, and this is why I started to study people. I was as curious about them as they were about me. And to no surprise of my own, I got a little lost along the way and started studying every bit of people. And I mean literally the cell. I started studying the cell. And after that, I started studying society. So that's how my academic path merged with my individual identity, my search to know the people in the world around me. And again, to no surprise, a lot of sociology speaks about who we are implicitly, tries to bring about knowledge that we all have, carry, and convey, but we do so implicitly. The explicit things, I think, certain aspects of sociological work do. For example, journalism. For example, politics. For example, popular critique. But as a sociologist, and more so as an ethnographer, it's the implicit knowledge that interests us the most. And so my curiosity, and this is what I think every researcher must at some point come to terms with, is what are the questions that drive you, initially drove you even to want to understand, to look at, to be with, to be around, to observe, to think about, to reflect upon, and to ultimately literally write down and to tell stories about people. And so the question again, who are you? What are you on one side? And what are you producing? What kind of resources are you making? And then forgetting about the even more elemental question, I think the aspect that differentiates us from beasts, if I may be so arrogant to say about Homo sapiens, is our ability to communicate. These animals are social. That's largely why they are here right now, right next to people, because the animals there we rarely harvest. But the animals here, the cows, the chicken, the pork, the animals that we consume, we're largely able to consume them because they are social. This is something that Jared Diamond talks about in his groundbreaking book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, about how people started to define what we were. We cultivated. Therefore, we could live in larger collections of people. We herd our food. Therefore, we can live in larger collections of people. Now, that's been contested recently by work, for example, that looks at the Amazon and how the Amazon itself was at one point urban before it collided in destiny with this form of cultivating food for us people to, manifest a we, to start to answer, define, and respond to the we question, as opposed to just what are you other than producing progeny. Now, so you can see why these questions that I ask about society come from my own desire to even answer for myself, but also for other people. Again, I'm a social being. The question, who am I? What am I? But I always think about those things and want to respond to those things. But I would also ask, who are we when we're asking each other those sorts of questions, and we yet distance ourselves by acting like what we think we're supposed to act like, as opposed to being who we're supposed to be. And I think those two ideas stand very much in conflict. Normative, patriarchal gender roles. What kind of progeny do you produce, and your whole identity being based on that, based on your literally what you do with your genitals type thing, is in stark contrast with the idea of who are we. You talk about African cosmology. As you can see, this is why I want to talk about these questions, not just for myself, not just here on YouTube, not just amongst my friends and family, but I want these ideas to really become a part of our social rhetoric, for us to ask, who are we, and why is it that we are constantly struggling between our genitals and their role in defining us, and our intellect and our role and our hearts and role in defining who we are, because what we are and who I am as an individual is only a small part of the equation.